Today's topic for discussion is causes for HIV/AIDS. To introduce the subject, human rights are inextricably linked with the spread and impact of HIV on individuals and communities at large. The issue of HIV/AIDS has become relatively a health as well as human rights crisis for the entire global communities. Hence, human rights are found to be fundamental to any response to this pandemic disease. The studies of medical sciences have revealed that there are three major modes of causing and transmitting the disease, namely, 1. It may be through sexual intercourse, which may either be homosexual or heterosexual. Number 2. It may be through contacts with blood products, or donated organs or semen. 3. It may be through prenatal transmission either before birth, during birth, or shortly after birth. HIV can remain in human body for years together before any visible symptom emerges out, which could per se be the fatal stage of the victim, and such silent invasion often goes completely unnoticed. In addition, there is such therapy available for the disease. Therefore, the treatment of this pandemic is symptomatic only. This is also quite apparent that such monsters of gigantic proportions have been increasingly becoming a serious threat to the mankind. Eventually, HIV/AIDS, which is associated with socio-economic and cultural ramifications, also calls for an urgent global endeavor with multi-dimensional approaches to combat with this pandemic. Now let us try to understand what is AIDS. The term AIDS was coined on 27 July 1982 by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. The first cases of AIDS were reported from among gay men in USA on 5th June 1981. Earlier it was known as gay-related immune deficiency or GRID. Subsequent analysis of a blood sample of a Bantu man who died of unidentified illness in the Belgian Congo in 1959 made him the first confirmed case of an HIV infection. AIDS stands for Acquired Immunodeficiency Syndrome. Acquired means that AIDS is not inborn, not inherited. Many other immunodeficiency diseases are inherited, but acquired from outside the human body. Immunodeficiency means that the body's defense system has been weakened, rendering the person unable to defend himself against the diseases. AIDS is not a single disease but a syndrome, a group of symptoms or disease processes that together indicate the presence of disease. It has been first described as a new clinical entity in June 1981 by the Center for Disease Control (CDC). The definition of AIDS was revised on 1st September 1987 by the CDC as a disability or life-threatening illness caused by the human immunodeficiency virus, also known as HIV, characterized by HIV encephalopathy, HIV wasting syndrome, or certain diseases due to immunodeficiency in a person with laboratory evidences for HIV infection or without certain other causes of immunodeficiency. The new definition requires a blood test indicating that the person is infected with HIV. A CD4 close T4 lymphocyte count of below 200 per cubic millimeter is indicative of AIDS. The normal CD4 count is somewhere between 500 and 1500 cells per cubic millimeter of blood. Patients progress to AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, when their CD4 cell counts drop below 200 cells per microliter of blood. Individuals who have CD4 cell counts below 200 are at the greatest risk of developing opportunistic infections. Early symptoms of AIDS include chronic fatigue, diarrhea, fever, mental changes such as memory loss, weight loss, persistent cough, severe recurrent skin rashes, herpes and mouth infections, and swelling of the lymph nodes. Opportunistic diseases such as cancers, meningitis, pneumonia, and tuberculosis may also take advantage of the body's weakened immune system and produce diseases. Although periods of illness may be interspersed with periods of remission, AIDS is almost always fatal. Let us now try to understand what is HIV. The first description of the virus causing AIDS, called LAV or lymphadenopathy associated virus, by the Pasteur team at the time was thus published in May 1983 in the magazine called Science. HIV stands for Human Immunodeficiency Virus, the virus that causes AIDS. Sometimes it is called AIDS virus. The virus was isolated on 23 January 1983 by Dr. Luc Montagnier of Pasteur Institute of Paris, France, and his team from the patients with AIDS, presenting themselves with persistent lymphadenopathy and hence called it lymphadenopathy associated virus, LAV. On 23 April 1984, Dr. Robert Gallo and his colleagues from the National Institute of Health, NIH, Maryland, USA also reported isolation of a virus from patients with AIDS and named it human T-cell lymphotrophic virus 3, HTLV3. HTLV1 and 2 were discovered earlier in connection with the human T-cell leukemia. On 9 May 1986, the International Committee on Taxonomy of Viruses ruled that both names should be dropped and a new name, HIV, Human Immunodeficiency Virus, be used. AIDS awareness was soon brought to public's consciousness when the famous American film star Rock Hudson died of AIDS on 2 October 1985. Dr. Luc Montagnier and his team isolated a second HIV virus responsible for causing AIDS from among patients in Cameroon, West Africa in April 1986. This new virus was named HIV-2, while the original virus referred to as HIV-1. The predominant virus is still HIV-1. The human body cannot get rid of HIV. That means that once you have HIV, you have it for life. Body fluids associated with HIV transmission is equally important to understand. The following body fluids have been proven to spread HIV, which include blood, semen, anal mucus, vaginal fluid, vaginal mucus, discharge from sexually transmitted infections, breast milk, other body fluids containing blood. There are other body fluids that may transmit the virus that healthcare workers may come in contact with, which include cerebrospinal fluid surrounding the brain and the spinal cord, synovial fluid surrounding the bone joints, amniotic fluid surrounding a fetus. HIV is a human virus. A person already infected with HIV is therefore the sole source of this infection. Body fluids which cannot pass on HIV are also important to understand, which include tears, saliva, sweat, urine, feces, vomit, spit. Now let us try to examine what are the types of HIV. There are two distinct human immunodeficiency viruses, HIV-1 and HIV-2. The two types of HIV appear to differ in the ability to cause the disease. HIV-2 is less pathogenic than HIV-1 or have more extended clinical latency period. HIV-2 is largely confined to West Africa, but HIV-1 has spread worldwide. HIV-2 is least infectious. The incubation period is much more longer and risk of mother-to-child transmission is very less. In India, 95% of infections is due to HIV-1 and 5% or less is due to HIV-2. HIV weakens the human body's immune system, making it difficult to fight infection. A person may live for 10 years or more after infection, much of this time without symptoms or sickness, although they can still transmit the infection to others. HIV is a fragile virus which can only survive a limited range of conditions. It can only enter the body through naturally moist places and cannot penetrate unbroken skin. Prevention therefore involves ensuring that there is a barrier to the virus, for example, condom or protective equipment such as gloves, and that skin piercing equipment is not contaminated. The virus is killed by bleach, strong detergents, and very hot water. HIV is transmitted from one person to another in three routes. 1. Unprotected sexual intercourse with an infected partner, the most common behavior. Heterosexual, bisexual, or homosexual. Number 2. Blood or blood products through sharing of needles and syringes, transfusion of infected blood, organ or tissue transplants, or use of contaminated injection or other skin piercing equipments. Number 3. Transmission from infected mother to child during pregnancy or at birth and breastfeeding. Healthy skin is an excellent barrier against HIV and other viruses and bacteria. HIV cannot enter the body through unbroken skin. HIV is not transmitted by casual physical contact, coughing, sneezing, and kissing, by sharing toilets and washing facilities, by using eating utensils or consuming food and beverages handled by someone who has HIV. HIV is not spread by mosquitoes or other insect bites. The HIV epidemic is mostly an epidemic of women. Women are more vulnerable to HIV infection as compared to men because of biological, social and economic factors. Even the children are also equally vulnerable to it. 90% of the children get their HIV infection from their mothers either during pregnancy, childbirth or breastfeeding. The remaining 10% of the children get their infections through blood transfusion or through unsterilized needles and syringes. Sexual contact, including sexual abuse, syringes, including injection, drug use. Girls, when subject to sexual abuse or early marriage or when denied an education, are especially vulnerable. Children are also more vulnerable to HIV infection because of poverty, illiteracy, sexual abuse, discrimination, etc. Vulnerable children are the children at risk of abuse, neglect, discrimination, or violations of their rights because of their association with HIV/AIDS. Children affected by HIV/AIDS include those who are HIV positive, those who have been orphaned by AIDS, and those who are living in a household which is affected by HIV/AIDS, usually because their parents are HIV positive. HIV positive children are likely to die within 2 years unless diagnosed and treated. Parental illness often leads to poverty and disintegration of family. To conclude, although the disease was basically detected in the early 1980s in the Western countries, the first trial of AIDS was reported to have been detected way back in 1959. Officially, it was only in 1984 that the epidemic was stressed to be associated with the human immunodeficiency virus as the cause of AIDS. Today, HIV has virtually resulted in grim consequences to the entire human race. The miseries of those unfortunate victims of such pandemic disease have been further aggravated by various factors such as widespread stigmatization, discrimination, and lack of medical facilities, among others, which have ultimately resulted to the denial of their basic human rights and freedoms. Therefore, it is also imperative to undertake collective efforts of all the stakeholders, including the governments, non-governmental organizations, social scientists, medical and legal experts, to check out effective means for prevention and control of HIV/AIDS.